Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Andrew Lockington. As of 1998, Andrew wrote the scores for numerous TV series and films. His big list of credits includes projects such as At the End of the Day, The Sue Rodriguez Story, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Percy Jackson, Sea of Monsters, San Andreas, Rampage, and most recently, The Kindness of Strangers, which premiered at the Berlinale in February. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Andrew, at first, I would like to know more about your background and how you started out in this business.
Yeah, I like so many of us, I started playing piano very young, 3 or 4, and doing lessons. And like a few other people who play piano, I didn't really love to practice. So I would find myself showing up at my piano lessons not completely prepared for what I had been assigned. And so I, by default, got very good at improvising, and somehow discovered that piano teachers seem to know the second line of Mozart, and they're hard to fool. So, but I basically started playing around and loved writing little songs and writing themes, and played keyboards and sang in a band. And then went to university and studied music at university, and got really excited by orchestration and other kinds of music, world music, and basically out of the sort of pop world that I'd sort of inherited in my high school years. And I was very fortunate at a university to find and connect with Michael Dana, composer who he and I had grown up in the same hometown in Canada. And he took me under his wing as an apprentice, and had many good years of working with him as well as with his brother, Jeff Dana. And that really was such an amazing experience for me, because it allowed me to see the industry from the inside, and Michael's approach to film scoring was very unique at the time and continues to be, and it was an amazing experience, probably the best education I could have had. And Michael was fantastic. He was very supportive in me pursuing my career on my own, and yeah, we remained friends. So it was a fantastic experience for me.
By 2001, if I'm not mistaken, you had co-written a couple of scores with him. The one I mentioned in my intro, the Sue Rodriguez Story.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think is the most important lesson you learned from him? Because you also assisted him, you worked as a music assistant for him on a couple of his projects. What do you think is the most important lesson you learned back then?
Probably that writing the music is one of the easier parts of this job. There's a lot of work and effort and skill that goes into presenting your scores, and encompassing the vision of the director and the producers into your vision. And that's something Michael does very well. And also coming up with a unique approach to each score, trying not to duplicate yourself and do the same thing twice, and find these elements inside the story, inside the film, inside the setting or the time period, something that you can use as a catalyst to have a unique approach to the score.
Would you say it's more difficult to pitch an idea to the filmmakers to find a common ground as opposed to the writer themes?
No, I think they're both challenging. It's funny you mentioned themes. I think themes is such a large percentage of what we do. Once you have tackled the themes and you have a roadmap for how to score the film, the actual scoring part is much easier. I think coming up with an idea, selling it to the filmmakers, and really presenting a roadmap, that I think that is the lion's share of the work.
How did you define or find your own style, musical voice?
I think I'm still finding it, actually. I think it's something that evolves, and certainly when I listen to things I wrote 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I can hear a difference. I think a lot of times, I think it's like a painter. We have some works of art by by different painters, and you can really follow their career and know, okay, this is a style that they were doing 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and then it evolved into something else. I don't think it's a conscious thing, really. I think it's just something that emerges in your work over time. So I'm as much of a student of that evolution as anybody else who listens to the music. But certainly when you work on a project, there are always avenues or elements there, or maybe unexplored roads within an idea that might not be appropriate to the project you're working on now, but you certainly shelve it away and think about it for a future project. So I think it's very much an evolution. I mean, I learn something new on every score, and I have new ideas illuminate themselves each time that I'll sort of keep a notebook and log away for something to explore at a later time.
How would you describe your own musical style? I mean, you've worked on so many pictures, from the large blockbusters such as Andreas to The Kindness of Strangers, which is one of your most recent projects. How would you describe your own musical personality?
I mean, the emotional side of scores is definitely the thing that is my glue, and it's sort of the catnip for me in terms of diving into a project, is finding the emotional threads. I mean, even on a score like Rampage or San Andreas, you know, the emotional connections and the relationships in those scores really informed everything in the music. It informed how I wrote the action music, and you know, even though it's a minority in terms of screen time, it ends up being the most important seed of all of the ideas. So in terms of my style, I don't know how I'd describe it. I definitely like themes. I like earworms that you can grab onto as an audience, and then do enormous number of variations on that, some subconscious, some conscious. Yeah, I like to think that is how people will describe me one day, because that is the approach I try to keep most sacred.
Great. And you also orchestrate yourself. You write a theme, you write a melody, and then you start the orchestration. What is essential when it comes to the orchestration process?
I actually started out as an orchestrator, but that said, I think my history of actually doing orchestration and understanding voicing and arrangements really informs my writing. So unlike other composers who are taking I'm not sure this even happens anymore, but in the past, people would just write a score on piano and give it to an orchestrator and say, here, put it in orchestra with these instruments and this melody doing this. I actually end up doing mock-ups prior to giving it to an orchestrator. I do. I have a number of times, like Kindness of Strangers, I orchestrated myself. The Space Between Us, the Peter Chelsom film, I did myself. So I do like to do it from time to time, but big action brass, and you know, I'm definitely lucky to have someone like Nicholas in my arsenal.
I think most composers these days are kind of forced to present a digital mock-up. Does it also happen to you all the time, or is it like let's say, do you on some occasion write a mock-up, and on a different movie you play everything on a piano?
Certainly for theme writing, I'll often present it on a piano or a guitar, and I can do that quite simple. And directors are really good at sort of picking out, yes, I like that melody, no, I don't. You know, there's not a lot of room for imagination. And by the way, for me neither. You know, when I hear something now of any kind of music, it's hard for me to imagine how it will sound. You know, I often equate it to directors. They'll show me storyboards and they'll say, here's what my film will look like. And for me, I see storyboards. You know, as much as they describe, it's really hard for me to imagine how the moving images, once they're shot, will look. And I think mock-ups and melodies are like that for composers. I can sit at a piano and play a theme and a suite on a piano and completely imagine it. I'm almost hearing the orchestra in my brain without even imagining it. But I recognize full well that the majority of people, including other composers, are simply hearing piano. So I think the mock-ups are really important. And and certainly I mean, orchestras are so expensive to record. When it comes time
Yes.
to record the orchestra, you have a really good sense. A lot of those decisions are made, whereas in the old days, there was a lot of changes on the floor. I don't think that happens as often.
Do you think this ensures a smoother process on both ends? Because you present your idea fully orchestrated electronically, and then the director and producer, they kind of react to that. Do you feel it leads to less rejection?
In terms of presenting, I think you can give a director a much better idea of what it will sound like. I'll tell you, one of the limitations is um, string samples are fantastic, and all of the sounds that we get in mock-ups are great, but they typically do one or two things really well. Like a sound will be great, it'll have a slow attack, and it informs you as a composer. You tend to gravitate towards writing the style or the tempo of music that sounds best with that sound, with that sample. And very easily it can pigeonhole you into sounding like everybody else. So it's definitely a disadvantage. And, on Rampage with Brad, there were some cues where I said, look, this is a rough mock-up, but I'm actually going to have the orchestra do this, and they're going to play this way. And I can't actually mock that up. And luckily we've worked together enough that I had that trust from him.
And in February this year, you went to the Berlinale to also promote your latest project, The Kindness of Strangers. Please tell our listeners a bit about that particular film and how you approached it musically.
Well, I was really lucky to work with Lona Scherfig, a director I've admired for years. Her film, In Education, Their Finest. She's a storyteller from beginning to end, every step of the process. She very much knows what she wants, and she's very good at creating a creative synergy with her team, and certainly that was my experience being her composer. The story of the film, it takes place in New York City, Manhattan, present day, and it's basically four strangers, groups of people, but sort of four stories that all interconnect, and these people who are going through really difficult times and how they can affect each other in a positive way. And the music, when she approached me, I think she already had in her mind the idea of it being lush and orchestral. She had listened to some other scores I'd done that were like that, and I think had gravitated towards them. And I really liked her approach, which was in the film. There's a moment early on in the film where just before any of the characters have really connected or crossed paths, two of the characters are outside a concert hall, in the vein of Carnegie Hall. It isn't in the film, but imagine that in Manhattan. And they can hear the music coming and bleeding outside, and they're on opposite sides. They don't know each other. They can't see each other. But they're both very much affected by this music and how much this beautiful classical music contrasts their life and where they are. And it very much sets it up as a goal. And I loved that idea. I loved the idea so much that actually we used that as an opportunity to introduce one of the main themes of the film, and I orchestrated it and scored it in such a way that it would sound like a classical piece from hundreds of years ago that is being performed by an orchestra, and then take the little elements out of that and have them be the motifs and the themes for the score going forward, because it really, really represents, it defines these characters in a way that you wouldn't normally think it would. But it's rather than the music reacting to where they are and who they are visually, the score is inside their heads, kind of telling you where they want to be and what they're measuring their lives against. So I loved working on that level. I loved permission to write that kind of music, just a pure orchestral approach with a few strange sounds thrown into the arrangement. But I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed how thematic how the film really called for these themes and this element in a really unabashed way, and I liked that a lot. I think it's a beautiful film.
Do you prefer a director like Lona Scherfig, who has a strong point of view as to what the music should sound like, or do you find it sometimes stifling to have too much directorial input?
Actually, the input's fantastic. I've had projects where I don't have a lot of input from a director, and I really enjoy getting in a room with a director and rolling up your sleeves and them not just saying, yes, that's great, or no, I don't like that. I like them saying, hey, I get what you're doing. What if we try this? What if we try this? And I really enjoy their input. And someone like Lona, yeah, she came to the process with a strong vision of what she thought it could be, but there was so much freedom within that. And I never felt like I couldn't challenge her and, disagree with her or throw another idea. She was very open to that. So I don't know that I've ever had a stifling experience where a director sort of handcuffs you and forces you to go in a direction you don't want to go. That's one of the things about doing this for a living is, the score has to be something that you have to make the studio happy, you have to make the director happy, you have to make the characters and the actors happy sometimes. But over and above all of that, you have to make sure it's something you can be really proud of and you feel is not only a good piece of music, but something that helps tell the story in a way that isn't going to distract people from what the experience and the storytelling.
When a film like this, deals with characters that probably strike the audience as complex and also troubled, what does the music need to express?
I think the big thing for me is that in a film, especially a film like this, that the music not express what we're already seeing. I think it's really easy to go, okay, they're sad, let's be sad. Or, there's a very literal approach to storytelling with music that, there are films it works and there are places in a film where it's a necessary thing. But I think if you can actually use the music to define bigger themes, to connect characters who, if it was a novel, your audience may be able to see the parallels between two characters who've never met. But when it's a film or in theater, that's something really hard to portray unless it's in the music. The music's the only way for them to have some common ground that they can both latch onto, despite the fact that they have no screen time together and no storylines crossing. So I think music can achieve that.
And music, of course, being one of the most important ingredients of a motion picture, how do you try to guide the audience through a film of this kind? Did you in this, or for this movie, try to find a direct representation of the characters, or did you try to make it sound more hopeful than it was at a certain point?
Yeah, I think this movie gave context. In the scene where two of the themes are introduced in the concert hall, one of the main characters is telling her sons, there are people who actually get to sit and go hear a concert like this. They get to enjoy this music and they just close their eyes and they appreciate it and they love it. And in that scene, the boys then close their eyes and they're imagining, they're longing for a time when that music will score them, will score their life, when that can be them, because they're in a terrible situation, fleeing abuse and homeless. Yeah. And so in this sense, I loved the idea of using the music as a reference point, as a place where they want to arrive. And what ends up happening is, the theme is definitely relevant to what's on screen, but you end up, at the beginning of the film, there's this contrast where they are and where they want to be. And over the course of time, you get to a point in the film where the music is, you're no longer, as an audience, recognizing that they're not there, that they're on the other side of the wall. Now you realize, wow, the music does define them now. It is their theme. I do understand why they dreamt that music, and I loved that idea. I love the idea of the music not being, oh, it's really sad, it's really dark, and then, oh, it's getting happier as they're getting happier. I think instead, a lot of times music can force your audience to appreciate and to actually participate emotionally. You know, in Rampage, there's this scene at the end of the film where one of the characters, the gorilla, is dying.
Yes.
And Dwayne's character is trying to save him. And the music that is playing in that scene is the theme of when they met. Like this really emotional meeting, and when things were, you know, much simpler, and they had this bond when they were younger. And I think, to me, that was far more powerful because it was scoring what they were going to lose. It wasn't scoring the loss. It was scoring how, you know, imagine a funeral. Imagine you go to a funeral.
Yes.
And somebody gets up and describes the person who's passed away and talks about how they died. This is how they died. This is the pain they went through. This is how painful we're all feeling right now. That's one way to do it. More interesting and more emotional is to say, this is who this person was when they were alive. This is who they were. And then the audience feels that sense of loss. So in the opposite way, in The Kindness of Strangers, I think it's saying, look beyond where they are. This is in their heart. This is who these characters are and who they believe this is the music they believe scores their life. And just because their life doesn't match it yet,
yes,
it will. And it's really defining what they're aspiring, a place they're aspiring to be in, which I think is beautiful. I mean, Lona did a great job of you know, not really taking away or banning romance or beautiful feelings from people who, in many circumstances, people would think didn't have the luxury to feel that way. They had to worry about what they were going to eat or where they were going to sleep.
Yes.
But she does a great job of entitling them to those dreams and to those emotions.
Do you think you as a composer need to be in the right state of mind emotionally in order to react to those scenes, to fully absorb it, in order to be able to write the themes? Or do you adjust quickly on the fly, so to speak?
No, I think you do your best work if you can assimilate with the characters. And it's funny, working on a film, I always hear about actors when they go and work on a film and they become fast friends. And in a really strange way, that's also the composer's experience as well, with the exception that none of them know who we are unless we visited set briefly and had a chance to meet them and talk about their characters. But I really feel when I work on a film like The Kindness of Strangers, they felt like my friends. You know, I was scoring them from a very personal place because I you know, had really endeared myself to who they were.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. It's not always as easy, depending on the kind of film. I mean, there's a lot of films where the character never disarms themselves to the audience, and therefore, as a composer, you either are in the same position as the audience, or you have to invent, with the help of the director, a persona beyond that wall that you can score and represent in the music. But yeah, certainly, you know, I think you write, with the exception of action chase music or big buildings falling over and you know, big animals breaking things. I think usually you definitely want to put yourself in an emotional state to best represent what the characters are feeling.
Do you think a purely organic and orchestral approach is still the best way to express human emotion?
I think audiences are becoming more sophisticated. They're open to being affected in many other ways other than orchestral. However, there's a comfort and it's funny, when you look at a film, you have to really work to justify the instrumentation and the approach of the score.
Yeah.
You have to say, why does it deserve this? And, you know, if there is, you know, a gamelan or, you know, some world instrument. It used to be that you had to have some reference, some Indonesian or Javanese reference in the film to justify it. And it was never that way with orchestra. Orchestra was always something no one would question. It was just a sound that was synonymous with storytelling.
Pure, maybe.
Yeah, pure. And now I think that has expanded much beyond the orchestra. It's still something that can be a very powerful and effective tool, but there's other. I just scored a series that takes place in India, and there's maybe one Indian instrument in the entire thing. It's a whole eclectic group of instruments, and it turned out great. But we're not in a world anymore where you have to be, beholden to a culture or a time period or a certain group of instruments. I think audiences are much more sophisticated and enjoy being challenged in that way.
Do you think it might sometimes be too obvious to let's say underscore a certain film with, let's say, indigenous instruments? Do you feel it kind of might take away a little bit of the surprise?
Yeah, for sure. I do a series called Frontier with Jason Momoa and a number of characters. And it's a fascinating series because it's basically, I'm scoring a clash of cultures. I'm scoring all the European cultures that are coming over to North America at the time of the fur trade. I'm scoring colonialism, the British Hudson's Bay Company that basically owned a large part of North America. I'm scoring the Cree, the Ojibwe, all these indigenous groups. And the obvious way, maybe the way that it would have been done 20 years ago or 30 years ago, would have been to represent everyone perfectly with a certain style of music.
Yeah.
And interestingly, there are a lot of indigenous elements to the score, but their main theme is cellos and basses, and it's actually quite a sort of a Western European kind of feel in and amongst modular synth and processed percussion, and so I think it for me it created a palette, and it gave me a window into a certain palette of sounds.
Andrew, is there going to be a full score album on The Kindness of Strangers?
Yes, there will be. I'm not sure of the release date as of yet. I think it's pending the release date of the film, but yes, there will be.
Digital only or also physical?
I'm not sure. I hope physical. I'm still a sucker for that. I like my CDs and vinyl. I love vinyl. So.
Me too. I'm a sucker for CDs, and it's for me. It's always important to ask any composer, any artist about a physical release, because there are still, luckily, quite a few people that care for a CD, but unfortunately, the let's say the interest in a physical CD has declined a lot over the last couple of years, and many people just go for the digital album.
Yeah, I agree. Well, what I find really interesting about film music, and strange actually, is that when you're writing the music for a story, for a film, so many of your choices are inspired, where the theme happens, where it stops, where the pauses. These are all informed by visual things. That the end result of a soundtrack, to me, always feels like there's a limb missing on the doll, because writing it, there are thematic suites and elements that would have been very different if I had taken that theme and extrapolated it for concert music. So it's a strange thing. But I too, I always loved growing up soundtracks because it allowed me a chance to relive the story or relive the emotions of the story. And ironically, as they get more and more popular, the advent in the medium of physical releases is dying.
Yeah, unfortunately. It's also, I mean, I've talked to many people about this, but it's also the money factor is also a huge, let's say, has been a huge influence on people making a decision to kind of cut back on the physical release just to save some money. And it's also easier. It's easier for them to distribute the final product.
Absolutely. You know, when I think Amazon does CD on release or CD on demand.
Yes,
Just
they do.
a
Yep.
great idea. I regret to say I haven't actually taken advantage of it yet, but I think it's a maybe a way of the future.
Andrew, final question about the film. The movie delivers a certain message that people should, care for each other, and it emphasizes that people should deal with it with each other courteously. Do you think that these attributes seem to kind of vanish in today's society?
Certainly in media. I mean, certainly in the films. I mean, it's unique in that way. It's rare to have a message have such positivity in a film, and not, to leave a group of characters significantly better off than where they were at the beginning of the film isn't nearly as common anymore. I love it. I mean, I love that that Lona isn't afraid to go there, isn't afraid to give us something that has hope. And I mean, the characters aren't living in mansions and
Yeah.
and won the lottery or anything, but I think in this day and age, it's nice to counter a lot of the very good darker material that's out there, and I think Lona did a great job of that.
Yeah. And it's good to watch a movie about characters of this kind, and also it's good or it feels good that there are still people that care for each other as opposed to just, look out for their own interest. And I think in at least that's my 2 cents, in today's world, people seem to be more comfortable just, communicating with other people online, also in terms of the huge trend of social media. And I think that many people seem to, let's say, seem to want to live a life that precludes them from interacting with other people personally.
Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting. Somebody was telling me recently, friends of ours, and we were talking about Netflix because I've worked on a few Netflix projects, and they were saying, they go home as a family and they all watch a different Netflix show. So the whole idea of, TV being something family does together is evolving into, even everyone could all be home at the same time, parents and children, and they're all watching a different screen and their own customized show. It's it definitely isn't, and that approach makes you worry about just socialization of people in general. But I know my family, we really enjoy sitting down and having an hour show or doing something as a family and then discussing it. I mean, I think the best cinema and the best media is something that it can inspire you to have conversations, and it's kind of countering the dumbing of society and actually exposing people to really complex issues and situations in a good way.
Andrew, what's actually next for you? What are you currently working on?
I'm working on a series actually called Daybreak. It's a Netflix series. It's producers Brad and Jeff I've worked with several times. Brad was the director of Rampage and San Andreas.
Yeah.
So working on that, and then I have another film project that hasn't been announced yet, but I actually am starting research next week, doing recording in Japan, of all places.
Fantastic. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It was a huge pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too, and I'm sorry it took us a while to get this on the books, but I really appreciate chatting with you, and thank you for having me on.